freezing out there.
It is freezing out there, and I mean, I'm not normally one to be very cold. I'm in a t-shirt. I don't do jumpers or sweatshirts or anything like that, and I can feel it. So if I can feel it, then it's definitely cold.
Well, you've been running a t-shirt in this weather. You're right and hardy. That's all I can say.
Big thick reptilian skin, I think.
Let's talk about the book anyhow, and even though it's based very much, or there's a lot of it that happened in real life, you decided to go with a book of fiction and the central character Martha.
Yeah. The reason why I wanted to have a fictional character in it is because, I mean, if you look at the free dairy period, 1690, 72, it's a fascinating period of history, because my professional background is as a social worker, and I learned a lot about humanitarian crises, which are normally citizens being displaced or expelled from their homeland, whereas this was different, where everybody decided to barricade themselves in. So that's very, very unique. And, you know, inside that time, where it was a self-declared autonomous state, where the healthcare network was propped up mainly by teenage girls, which was the Order of Malta, and first aid posts that were pop-up, run by volunteers. Some doctors and nurses helped out. And I thought that's a really fascinating element of it, because you hear different stories, like from political elements, from paramilitary elements, and whatever else, whenever it comes to defining local history. But nobody has thought of this entity where it was first aid, where it was the people that were there to serve the community, to prop up that community when healthcare and general health overall in such a deprived area was so bad. And there's so much happened in that tiny space, in that tiny frame of time, 3 years. So the reason I deployed a fictional character in it was to try and get as wide a view of events as possible, because a real person wouldn't have seen or heard every pivotal moment in that 3-year history.
But when it's a fictional character, you can pull on in all these other strands.
Yeah.
Okay. And, you know, some of them fictional, some of them real.
Yeah, and
obviously.
And throughout the writing of the book, I actually had gathered together a group of the Order of Malta volunteers and families from those who are sadly no longer with us, to kind of help influence, you know, what they did, who they were, and to kind of get an atmosphere of how they interacted with one another. And I mean, in the beginning, there was some skepticism, because there's been 50 years of inquiries, solicitors, nosy journalists, everything else. So I wanted to have a fictional character in that to kind of portray some sense of feeling and loving life in that time without probing too deeply into what was already a very difficult time for them.
Before you started this book, you weren't au fait with this period of history or the intricacies of what went on. But when you got stuck in, it was 100%, and you decided to do some proper research.
Absolutely. Where I mean, I had 2 books out. I'd written about my experiences of being autistic in the mainstream school system and business and working life and everything. So I wanted to do something a bit different. So the seed was already sown for something different. And it was about this time last year when the sort of programme events for the 50th anniversary of Bloody Sunday were starting to be publicised.
Yeah.
And I thought, I know nothing about this, so I'm going to learn. And the way my brain's wired is, if I take an interest in something, I'm all in energy, time, and everything else. And I just became fascinated by it. I really fell in love with it. And I suppose it took over to some extent, but I didn't realise how important my local history was and how significant it was. And I suppose it's like a lot of people in a lot of places around the world, they take their own local history for granted.
Well, isn't it great to shine a light, in particular on these young volunteers, these Order of Malta volunteers, and they would have been doing what? Football matches and fairs, and, you know, just where people were gathering, and then all of a sudden they were thrust into almost a war situation.
Exactly. And what's actually funny is, whenever I had a room of them, and I would, if I said to them, you know, I think you're heroes and I think you're all very interesting, is that kind of in this part of the world, you know, whenever people turn their head like this, they think you're mad. You know, that was the look I got pretty much the whole time. And their humility was just incredible, because I thought, I did volunteering when I was younger. I did some youth work whenever I was younger. And I mean, they wanted to volunteer, they wanted to serve their communities, and you're right, that's the way it started out, like doing D&D football matches, the Lammas Fair, events, GAA games, and then all of a sudden they were put into the midst of a war zone, live ammunition, petrol bombs, and everything else. And what people take for granted too is they were taught basic first aid, where they were taught how to put on bandages, elastoplast, some burns ointment. But then, particularly in 1971 when internment came in, the riots got more ferocious and nail bombs started to be thrown, where they were treating some really, really horrific injuries because people didn't want to go to hospital, no matter how persuasive the Order of Malta volunteers tried to be.
And they would have been on the scene as it was happening, as opposed to being called in after the event.
It would have been a mixture of both. I mean, they would have been out on the riot lines. People would have been treated on the street. People would have been treated where they were if they were taken to nearby houses. I mean, first aid posts were popped up in the area, but mostly it would have been delivered on the street, on site, where they would have hidden and cover behind walls and laneways, and if people came for them, they had stretchers with them, and again, very basic first aid supplies.
It is a fascinating time in local history and social history and in the history of Northern Ireland. Tell us a wee bit about the book. Now, we're chatting there about real events and real volunteers, but that's only part of it. The book, obviously, a work of fiction. Tell us a wee bit about, without giving too much away, about Martha and what happens to her.
Well, with Martha, I wanted to capture what kind of growing up in Derry in the 50s and the 60s would have been like, where there's a couple of elements that I wanted to bring into it, where one element that I wanted to bring in was the Rossville Flats. Three big sector tower blocks in the middle of the bogside. I can't visualise them because they were knocked down before I was born. But what I noticed in Facebook groups and when people talked to me about them, they remembered them so fondly. It's like this sort of mythical place that I can't visualise. But then there's other people that think in their heads, oh, I can't imagine them gone, because they were there so long. So I have elements of that in it. And one really lovely part that was one of my favourite things in it, because a big part of the book is Bloody Sunday, is I wanted to have a sort of biographical account of one of the children victims of Bloody Sunday, and that was Hugh Gilmore, who lived in the Rossville Flats. So meeting with his family, getting recollections and sort of telling the child's story was another good aspect of it. And as time went on, kind of whenever I was on the writing journey of it, I just got talking to so many different people, and I wanted to incorporate things like music, so having like a 60s bubblegum pop soundtrack in it as well. I just wanted to be like a time capsule, sort of love letter to the 60s and 70s. And yes, these events are well documented by history, but people lived their lives. People went to work, people went to school, people sort of got on with it, and despite really dark days, people did have happy memories too.
It's a bit like that. There's been a series of programs on RTE there recently about life here in Ireland during the Civil War, and how actually normal life for the most part just went on despite all these awful events that was happening around them, and that became part of our history. And the same was in Derry. I mean, we think about this time and we think about the Battle of the Bogside and Bloody Sunday, but normal life went on.
It did go on, and before and after, and I mean, trying to capture how surreal the time was. And one section of the book I'm really proud of is the 1969 riots, the Battle of the Bogside, because how surreal it was. Because, I mean, working with the Order of Malta volunteers who were there, who treated people on those 3 days, because, getting their feedback as I went, the most surreal thing, to happen during those 3 days was the idea that the RUC were throwing the stones back at them. We're throwing stones back. Like, I mean, what a thing for the police to have to do. And I think trying to capture that sentiment, because even at the start, whenever the first injuries were coming in, what happened to him? Oh, the police threw a stone at him. What? The police threw a stone at him. Did he tell you that? Right, I'm going to go down and see. And they came back and said, right, they're actually throwing stones back at young people.
Incomprehensible.
It is, yeah.
But it's, and again, I stress it's great to shine a light on these young volunteers in the Order of Malta, because to my knowledge, it hasn't really been done much. It's a whole part of this phase in history that has been sort of neglected. And was it enlightening when you got to meet some of these volunteers who were only young teenagers then? But
Incredibly enlightening, because this is the thing, and I just hold them in such high regard. I'd have a statue of every last one of them built if I'd get away with it. It's none of them wrote a biography. None of them really spoke publicly about their experience, because they got into the Order of Malta for the right reasons. They didn't do it for publicity. They didn't do it for praise or thanks. They did it for the true spirit of Christian charity and wanting to help people. And I suppose kind of from, the group of volunteers from that time, who were very, very young. I mean, some of them as young as 15 and upward. Most of them are between 69 and 72, were between 15 and 20. There were some older ones, but I mean, most of them were very, very young. And I suppose it's an area that not many people have talked about, because the way it works, particularly with Irish history, I found, is that the creakiest gate always gets the most oil. The people that like talking about it, the people that like speaking out about it, the people that love telling their experiences and writing it down in books, of which there are many. And I suppose all of those kind of creaky gates kind of superseded the Order of Malta volunteers, but hopefully not now.
Hopefully not now, indeed. And the title is particularly poignant because it hints at the coats that they wore.
Yeah, white coats, kit bags, and the way they did it was they were almost like a safety net. Like, I mean, they some of them would have walked out under the riot lines and stuff, but they would have hidden in laneways, hidden in corners, had a stretcher with them. They were just sort of in the background like ghosts, and then the white coats. So that's where the name of the book came from, because it's sort of among the groups of young people at the barricades, word circulated where the first aid girls were. So if they were in a rampway or a laneway where people could tell people where to go if they'd get hit with a stone or fell over, or a nail bomb blew up in their hand, or whatever else awful injuries they had to treat. But that's why the title was there. But then in photographs, if there's photographs that were taken of that time, they're very visible. Where I say to people, if you look at photographs of that time and you see a group of young people with white coats and big boots that are too big for them, then that's them. But now, whenever I say that and people look at them, you'll not see them now.
Right. Just want to mention your sort of your other work and your other life in a way. You're a TED speaker and also a founder of NTI Neurodiversity Training International, and what you do is you mentor people with autism.
Well, what I do is we do a couple of things. Primarily, we're a marketing and design company. So what we do is we work with autism charities and groups to create online courses, memberships, and there's a lot of autistic people themselves that want to set up their own business and kind of make a living out of their expertise and their writing. So we would do marketing, branding, stuff like that with them. And the other strand of it is schools training that I like to do myself, because I went through the school system as an autistic child. And when my first book came out, which was Why Does Daddy Always Look So Sad, and one of my first promo interviews was actually here in Highland Radio whenever that came out. And I realised when people were reaching out to me and writing to me that a lot of people were going through the same kind of issues that I went through, and this was the mid-90s and early 2000s. And I suppose the reason why autistic kids like me, the younger ones that are coming through now, are experiencing those things is because not a lot of people know about what being autistic is, what it means, and they have a strengths-based approach. So we're actually on the campaign trail to train every school in Ireland, north and south.
Okay, it's about awareness and understanding. Oh, okay, if somebody does want to reach out to you, get in touch with you, socials, email?
Absolutely, reach out to me. I have no issue giving out my email over the airwaves. It's jude@neurodiversity-training.com. The website is neurodiversity-training.net. judemorrow.com. I'm on social media, Instagram, or I'm everywhere. I'm omnipresent.
Put in your name and contact.
Yeah,
they'll find a way to contact you.
I'm easily found, easily approached, and very good at replying. So do not be afraid. Don't be shy. I don't bite.
It's been a pleasure chatting to you, Jude. The book is out now.
It is.
It's called The Ghosts of Riots Past. Jude Morrow, thank you very much. Happy Christmas.
And thank you very much.
The choices we make determine where we're